Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today from wherever you are in the world. This is the March 2023 monthly OpenNTF webinar, and today the topic is the temporary one-time password setup on Domino. Our presenter today is Keith Brooks. Keith is a longtime member of the community, IBM champion and HCL Ambassador, and he is currently based in Israel. I want to just quickly say thank you to the sponsors of OpenNTF. HCL has made a contribution to keep us doing what we're doing, and of course, all of the IT specific admin related services come to us from Prominic. So we want to say a quick thank you to both HCL and Prominic for supporting OpenNTF. And of course, our regular call for people from the community to join in and share what they know or ask questions. We've got a very active Discord server and invite everyone to join us over there and participate. And if you've got a project or an idea, by all means get in touch with us and we can help you get it rolling and then get it shared with the community, because when somebody shares something, we all learn. So very much encourage people to participate. I want to make a quick comment about upcoming events. Engage user group is coming up in just over a month now in Amsterdam, April 24th, 25th, and 26th. I saw a note from Theo, I think it was yesterday, that registrations are going quite well. There's still lots of room, but there's going to be lots of people there. So encourage folks who are able to and in the neighborhood to join the community in Amsterdam. And Richard Moy has announced the dates for CollabSphere. It says MWLUG there, but I think the official name is now CollabSphere. And it is going to be an in-person event for the first time, I think, in 3 years. So save the dates. It is at the end of August. He has yet to announce the venue, but by all means, mark your calendars. And that is an event that I plan to attend. So I'll look forward to seeing you there. Other upcoming events, OpenNTF related, we have our Repair Cafe series continuing. We had a developer cafe earlier this month, last week in fact, and next week we have 2 coming up. Our admin topics Repair Cafe on Wednesday, March 22nd, that more or less suits North America and European time zones. So 12 noon Eastern time US, 5 p.m. Central European time on Wednesday the 22nd. But on the 23rd, we will be doing an Asia Pacific time zone Repair Cafe. So admin and dev topics are open on that one. Both of them are scheduled for approximately an hour. We do run them off of our Discord server. The Asia Pacific time zone one will be running 12 noon Australia East Daylight Time, 10 a.m. in Japan, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, North America. And we encourage folks who are in those areas to join in. And we tried to hit a time zone that works for folks in the Asia Pacific region. So encourage folks to show up for that. And again, it's all on Discord. If you're not on our Discord server yet, please do head over to openntf.org. And there's a page there that explains how to get signed up on Discord. And then that's our place for doing community sharing and open meeting rooms and whatnot. So join us there. Our next webinar, April topic is going to be the Domino REST APIs, and we're currently marshaling some resources from HCL. The webinar will be on April 20th, kind of the same bat time, same bat channel. So that's what's coming up next month. And of course, we're right in the middle of the world switching time zones. So keep your eyes open on actual times, but by this webinar, everybody's time zones will have changed, so, or daylight savings time will have changed, so things should be back to normal by then. And last slide before we turn it over to Keith, our normal approach for asking questions is to use the panel in GoToWebinar to ask your questions there. Generally what we do is we save the questions till the end so that we can answer them verbally. We don't want to interrupt Keith while he's doing his presentation, but we do want to have the questions and answers in the audio portion of the webinar recording. So why do I say that? Well, because we are recording this webinar and it will be posted to YouTube, and they're all on our OpenNTF channel, and you can go back You know, the last 3 years we've been running these webinars, all of our presentations are there. And the slides will be available on our webinars page as well. When it comes to questions asked, we want to keep them specific to the topic at hand. And by all means, join Discord, as I say, and we can talk about all other topics on Discord. There's lots of activity going over there, as I say, so encourage folks to join us there. And with that, I am going to hand things over to Keith right now. Keith, make presenter. And I don't see, there we go. Okay. Take it away, Keith.
Okay. Graham, do you see the correct screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, then we're good to go. Okay. Thanks, Graham. And thanks, Roberto, in the background. Welcome, everyone, to TOTP. This is the way. My name is Keith Brooks, CEO for B2B Whisperer. Some of you may have read the years or some of the things that I've done. And I've been an IBM champion since they started in 2013, and I was HCL Ambassador since they started them in 2019. And along the way, I wrote a number of exams, including some of the most recent admin ones. In fact, if you don't like the TOTP questions on the admin ones, those were mine. So I take full responsibility. So today we're going to talk about TOTP. We have a bunch of things along the way to talk about with it. We're going to get through why you might want it and need it. We're going to talk about planning and prerequisites for it, and there are a lot of them. We're going to talk about how to configure TOTP, because although generally I skip this aspect, when I talk about it, OpenNTF reminded me that we're doing this for the greater community, and people who may not have actually been experienced with this yet need to know some of it. So I'm walking through the installation process with you. We're then going to get into troubleshooting when TOTP doesn't work or doesn't install or doesn't configure. After that, a very brief respite. That'll be how the user gets themselves set up. Then we're going to get into the managing the environment, what is available, when it came out, how you can do that. Then we'll have a small side part about resetting users' TOTP details for when people change their device or forget what they're doing. We're going to talk about customizing the login page itself and the graphics and text that you're going to see on the screen, because you want to make it as comfortable for your staff or your customers to know it is indeed your site, not a phishing site. And at the end, there's going to be a bunch of links. And as Graham said, we're going to have the questions and answers at that point. So we have a lot of things to talk about. So the first thing before I get into the slides is, why does this become important? At an individual level, most of us, it's really more of a pain in the neck that we have to go get our phone or go to our computer, pull up an app, put in a code, only to be able to get into a site, which we basically go to all the time, right? So why do we want to do this? So about 4 months ago, my grandmother actually was caught with ID fraud when someone took over her accounts. And part of the reason is not because they didn't have MFA, but she hadn't set up the accounts to start. And so once you get a hold of someone's mail file and all their stuff is in there and they didn't set up accounts, the person goes off and does whatever they want and off they go. So is the MFA, important? The answer is yes. Does it serve different purposes? Yes. Are there different reasons for it? Yes. The biggest reason, of course, we're going to get to, but a lot of people put off doing it until the last year or so. Now, of course, Domino got it in R12, and so, of course, people couldn't just roll it out until we had it. But the truth is, very few customers had asked for it over the years, and the ones who wanted it figured out a way to do it. So the biggest reason people put off needing the MFA, at least from a survey that was done in the US and the UK, was it was too difficult for them to do it. They didn't know how. They maybe knew the risk, but they didn't want to deal with it. They didn't care, which is probably the bigger thing people talk about. It conflicts with productivity. This one, the bottom one, the 13% conflicts with productivity, is something which I'm going to hit on during this session, because especially if you think about travel or verse, depending on how you want to talk about that, that's a real specific issue where it really will conflict with their productivity. But how we get around that is going to be up to each of us in our environments. So what is the MFA thing, right? MFA, for those who are unaware, is basically the multi-factor authentication. And what that means is we went from the early days of no logins to having a login, username, password, whatever, right? And now they want another level. In the earlier days of the internet, or pre-internet even, you may have gotten a secondary password, or you would get an SMS message, or you may have gotten another message that's sent out to you. And there were other ways, they're basically trying to provide more security at a time when security code wasn't really there for people yet, like it is now. But now we have it, and we have that option, and of course, we should be using it. But why should we be using it becomes a whole different discussion for us. Oops, I see my mouse doesn't want to click. There we go. So OTP, which is an aspect of the MFA, is one-time password, which is like I was saying, people would send an SMS to you, or that you would get an email with a totally different password to enter as a secondary level, right? And these are all, if you think about it, this is almost like the hierarchy of how we've built security through the years. Then came the hash base or a message counter type codes, which was, if you remember, some people still have them, the little handheld devices on their key fobs or something where the number would change, right? Some of those are actual time-based and some are hash-based. And the main difference between the hash and time, aside from the fact that one is based on time and one is based on a specific hash code, and to be fair, I'm not going into the deep technical stuff of all this. I'm trying to keep this at a level for business people and admins in general to just get an idea of why and what is going on here. And the main difference between the two is that with the hash, I can use that code, but so could somebody actually, like, down the block or next door to me kind of thing, because there was no expiration to that code. With time-based, as HCL is implemented, you're out of luck. You got 30 seconds or maybe more, right? But then you're out of luck. That's it. Your password's up and over, you're done. Goodbye. So it's a much more secure perspective than hash, although there are reasons for both in different purposes. So this brings up a question that I started asking customers. I said, are notes ID files a form of MFA? Why do we need TOTP if we're talking about note lines? And the truth is that generally the MFA and the TOTP stuff is talking about web-based aspects, not notes clients, not Windows desktops, right? But from a purely, shall we say, check the box aspect, does a notes ID meet the form of an MFA? The answer to me generally is yes, because you have to first log into that OS, whatever it is, Mac, Windows, Linux, whatever it is, and then you still get to notes and you have to put in your password for your notes password. So in my mind, the notes client still meets the MFA requirement for someone who needs to check the box that says we have an MFA for our internal purpose, whatever that means. Which brings up a whole other question of, is SSO a form of MFA? And if you understand that single sign-on is trying to make it easier for people to log in everywhere, then is SSO actually just secure ID at all? Generally, the answer would be no from security people, but the companies and the individuals in the companies want it because they want their lives to be easier, but at the same time less secure. As we all know, if I have your Windows login or password, actually your password, I pretty much have gang to do whatever I want, right? Now, if I have someone's notes password, I may or may not be an admin, right? And I may or may not be able to do something, but just having that password doesn't matter if you don't have the ID or if it's not in sync to the passwords, which is a whole other thing, right? But I'm trying to keep this on the aspects of a balance between security and the perspective the users have of functional productivity. So at the end of the day, why do you or your customers need TOTP, right? HCL went and produced it, and we have it. And I've done probably at least a dozen of these in the last year or two, maybe closer to 15 of them. Why do we need it? Generally, the reason has been compliance, insurance. More than half of my customers have come to us with a chart or a list or something and said, look, we got to get cyber insurance. And they're telling us we have to have this for anything that comes from the website. And I said, okay, what do they require? What does your insurance company tell you you must do? Crickets. I get no answer. Because basically the insurance companies are not technical wizards. They're not geniuses. They're just basically trying to cover their butt by saying, you have to do this. What they really are saying and what they really want people to do, though, is have like an MDM for whatever your devices are, and then have the MFA secondarily, right? But you get into discussions about, is my VPN enough? Do I have to have a second MFA? Should I do this? Should I do that? I was at a customer site, actually working on a customer. The customer has me doing an MFA entrance to log into the VPN. Once the VPN's logged in to RDP, I have to put the MFA just to have the RDP come up. Then I have to put the MFA again once I get to the box to log into the box. And then in one case, I actually still have another MFA I have to do for them. So how far do you have to go down this path is a very debatable question. But we're not here to really spend all day on security, but really talk about Domino and how this affects the MFA world in Domino. So I made a small little chart that kind of gives you the pros and cons. And the reason for TOTP, as I said, really are insurance, compliance, security. It kind of looks better when it's only one instead of like split, right? But then the reasons against it has been, what security does it add if the MFA is on your phone, right? Common question. Well, people steal their phone. What's the benefit of having the MFA there for their mail, for travel, right? And that's a valid question, one which we're going to get to, right? Increase in support tickets due to lockouts. The day you turn this on, you're going to have a nightmare of support that week. I got news for you. There's no way around it. Why? Because our users aren't the most intelligent people and none of them like to read. So whatever you've sent them, whatever you've told them, whatever it is, they're all going to ignore it, and come Monday morning or whatever it is, you're just going to have tons of calls. So be prepared. Must they log in every time to check for mail? Yeah, kind of. That is kind of what happens if you're going to enable this for Traveler. And we're going to talk about that, like I said. The ID vault must be up to date. Why? Because TOTP requires the IDs to be in the ID vault. So TOTP kind of has a triangle effect of you need TOTP, but TOTP is based on having the ID vault functional and working, having a proper server and templates on the R12 side, and having people register properly. So there's a lot of pieces of that puzzle. The other reason why sometimes people are not looking for the TOTP is that SAML is not supported for TOTP. Now, even with that, there are ways around this to a point, but we're going to get into break these down a little further as we move forward. So going back to our plan, we've talked about what the MFA is and why you probably want it. Now let's talk about planning and prerequisites. We might be here a while. This is my favorite slide that I've created. This is totally true, and this is the way. TOTP for Domino is URL defined. It is not server or application defined. HCL people, staff members, have actually gone to some of our conferences and even done some webinars where they stated the exact opposite of what I have here. But they were wrong. And I told them that in both situations. The setup and installation is server defined, but how a user interacts with TOTP starts with the URL, always. There is no other way to do this. There's lots of pieces and puzzles and ways to get around some of this. But at the end of the day, we're solely talking about how is a user going to log into our environment. We're going to give them a URL to use. And how are we going to configure that URL or multiple URLs for them to have access properly, both inside and outside? So planning is a must, right? So first thing to know is iNotes is one of the two most common requirements, right? Webmail, right? And the iNotes redirector, thank God, works with TOTP. Imagine if it didn't. Imagine the headache you would have trying to get that set up, but luckily it does. Web applications are the other most common reason why people need TOTP. We have external people logging into our apps. We have people coming in trying to use our systems. We've registered those people, and we need to give them the MFA. Not as simple as it sounds, as it turns out. And as I said, what if you have traveler and verse users? So there's a link here to an HCL tech doc or installation doc, whatever you want to call it, about mobile support for TOTP. And I've got a screenshot of what I've done in one of my domains, where if you think about it, if you don't set the idle session timeout to an extended amount of time, when people, and you've turned on TOTP and everybody's using verse, they will not get mail unless they log in perpetually, which will drive everyone crazy, right? If you extend the session timeout, as I've done to 20 hours here, right, then you've got a, well, for lack of a better word, let's say a day, where I can log in once in the morning and all day I'm good. But if I go back to the default or have this as 30 minutes or something like that, every time I look at my phone, there's not going to be new mail, and I'm going to have to like get the MFA, relog in, and this is where that user productivity gets in the way. So you have to talk to your security team, and you have to come to a realization that there has to be some safe way for us all to work together, be happy, run our security, run our customer actions, and make everything balance out. Some people have said for our staff, we don't want to harass them. We're not going to use TOTP for verse. Other people have said everything needs it because that's what we're told by our insurance company. And I told them to go back to the insurance company and ask for a detailed explanation, and they never get one. So my answer always is think about what you're doing and who you're doing it for and how you're going to do it. The other way to do this is to actually create multiple domains, multiple URLs, right? Because maybe you want certain people to enforce the MFA for their access and other people not to. So there are ways to do this, right? You're all hitting the same servers, but if I give you two different URLs and I tell you go to URL A and you go to URL B, but URL B is the only one with TOTP, URL A is just going to log in like normal, because TOTP is URL based. It's not server application based. I made a chart to help people because it's not always so easy to understand, and it's really not always easy to explain to management. So this was what I put together. So let's say you've got verse and iNotes, webmail, right? Internal people, TOTP required? Probably not, because it's internal. It's probably desktop, right? Not that that should be a reason, but I'm saying most people internally don't care, right? So you have URL A, right? Mail A or whatever. Then webmail verse nodes external access. TOTP gets required. Now it's turned to webmail.abc.com. That's just two URLs, right? Now let's say you have an application. Internally, again, you may not care, but externally you need it. Well, now you need two more because you need an internal URL and an external one. Traveler and verse, the same thing. You may or may not choose to have it. You may actually want two different ones. It's all possible. You just have to plan for it. Nomad, though, this is where the fun starts. Nomad doesn't work with Domino TOTP. And I had a recent talk with the product manager for that to verify indeed I am correct. And there is a answer, but it's obviously not what we want today, but I'm going to talk about it in a second. So even if you do all this, you've now got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to update your DNS and firewall accordingly. So remember to always map out what you're going to do, make sure your firewalls, both OS level and enterprise level, everything is there and working properly. Otherwise, your testing and configuration will drive you absolutely crazy. So about the Nomad question, Domino TOTP is not supported by Nomad. Nomad will work with HCL Safe they put in front of it, except the Domino one right now. But if you want Domino TOTP to work with Nomad, go vote for it. I put an AHA idea, or maybe this one isn't mine. Someone else posted it before me. I don't remember. There is an AHA idea, and you can go get it, and you can go vote for it. That discussion evidently is still going internally because I've talked to 2 different people in the past. They got 2 totally different answers. So they know maybe they should look at it, but maybe technically there's reasons why we can't do it. Hard to tell. So back to prerequisites. As I mentioned, the IDs need to be in the ID vault. This is a key aspect of TOTP. There is no other way to make this happen. If you don't have IDs in the ID vault, people won't be able to log in with the MFA. So, of course, that brings up the ever popular question. How do we get people in the ID vault? Or how do we set up the ID vault? Or how do we know if the ID vault even works? Or the admin left, nobody has access to the ID vault. Don't worry, we'll get to all those. Right. I apologize if my audio is going in and out. I've got a screen pop up that keeps telling me it's flaky, so I apologize. Servers must be R12. Why? Because TOTP only came out in 12.0. Mail does not have to be on 12 for TOTP because, again, it's about the URL. It's not about the application. It would be in your benefit, of course, to have the users on the R12 template, but I understand why in some cases you might not choose to do that, especially if you have not upgraded the clients yet to the R12 template, to the R12 version. You're going to need your cert ID accessible in the server data directory in order to set up the TOTP. So you're going to have to go find your cert ID. Some of you, that's easy. Some of you, it might not be so easy. You're also going to need the password. So, just letting you know in advance where we're going to go with this. SSL should be enabled. Doesn't have to be enabled. Most companies have done this, of course, these days, because it's hard not to. If you need more SSL certs, as I was describing before, you might need 6 of them suddenly, and you don't want to just throw an asterisk server at it, you can use the built-in R12 for free SSL certificates of Cert Store. And it will renew every 3 months. And I think OpenNTF previously has done a webinar about that. Maybe Daniel Nashid had done it. But if you don't know about this, you need to look into it. And if you do know about it, then you're lucky because however many URLs you're going to need, you get the SSL for free. It's a great thing, right? So let's think about this ID vault thing for a second, right? Let's say you're an internal mail user, and it doesn't matter if your notes on notes are verse, and the ID file's in the vault. So what do you need to do? The answer is you have a URL, probably already, and you can just set up TOTP, and you're good if you need TOTP internally, of course, right? What if you're talking about external users? Well, if the external user's ID is in the ID vault, it's not a problem. Set up the URL just like before, set up TOTP, and you show the person how to set it up and they're good to go. Now here's the question. What if you take an internal mail person who doesn't have an ID file in the vault? What do you do? Same thing to start, everyone needs a URL, but you may or may not have created the ID out there. And then you're gonna have to up somehow into the ID vault. There's a few ways. And then you set up TOTP and ready to go. And for external people, for mail, same kind of thing. If there's no ID in the vault, it's the same setup, right? Because you're going to end up with this need to allow people to have an ID vault, have an ID in the ID vault, sorry. And there's only a few ways to get that ID into the vault if the person is registered properly to begin with. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So let's say you've got apps, because usually the external people coming in are coming in over the internet, and they're usually coming in for apps, not for mail, right? For the moment, we'll just hold the mail for a second. So internal or external app users, if the ID file is there, just like before, you have a URL, set up TOTP, you're fine. But when you don't have it, now what do? So these people are interesting because the page before, the people were mail users. Mail users, generally, when you registered them, you created an ID for them, created a mailbox file for them, right? Even the external people, right? Now you're going to say, but these people aren't mail people. They're just external application users. I'll bet most of you registered these people as non-mail or non-Domino users. And if you did, there is no ID. There's no certification. So how do you get those IDs into the vault? How do you create those IDs? So I created well, actually I wrote a post a long time ago about how to register people with the CSV file in the registration database. You need that to start because you're going to have to take these people, especially these external people, put them into the spreadsheet, put them into the form, and you're going to have to upload that. And then you're going to have to write some agents to copy people's passwords over, maybe any references you have in the address book. You have to adjust some other information accordingly along the way. You have to tell it that they're going to be mail people, because if you don't say it's mail people, registration will not create the ID. This is something which I've asked HCL to look into, because I said, you've given us TOTP, but you haven't changed the registration way it works in 15 years. And I said, I know that because I read a blog post in 2010 about how to register people. So we need more fields in that registration CSV. We also need the system to recognize people who are going to need TOTP and not use mail, but they need an ID. So if you think that this is something also HCL could do better, there's an aha link for this part of the admin side. So a little bit more depth. How do we put those IDs in the vault? This is actually, I could probably do an entire session just about this, because this in itself is a whole process, although I've got it down pretty fast now. And I found out about this, well, obviously I had a customer, I needed to load TOTP, but they had like 3,000 or 4,000 people I had to load, right? You know, it's one thing when someone says, oh, I got a dozen people. Okay, fine, so you make some IDs, you're done. You get a few thousand people, that's not 5 minutes of work. So here's what we decided to do. Normally your IDs go there when they're created, but these people weren't created, but they were created through some app you had, or maybe manually as internet users. So they don't have an ID, but they have other info in their address book, in your address book, and you need that info. So what are you gonna do? So the process is a mix of registering the users with that text file, the CSV, and some automatic settings, because the registration process itself has the way, one of the options in the option button is so that you say ignore existing people, or you can say and add on to the existing people without overwriting them, which is what you want to do. So you're kind of trying to update their existing formula. What we did was we actually renamed all the 3,000 people to like user X or whatever it was, so we can create all fresh people. Then we ran an agent to run against all those people that matched up by email and pulled all the relevant fields from the old entry into the new proper entry. So all their stuff came, their password came, their phone number, all that stuff. And we got everybody registered. Then we ran a different task to run an agent that basically wiped out all the references to Domino mail and so said, no, we're not on mail. And we had a different thing that went through and cleared out all the mailboxes that we had created, because we had to create mailboxes, which is something else I'd like HCL to fix, that we don't have to create mailboxes just because we're creating users. Anyway, at the end of all that, that's kind of what we did. I've written a number of blog posts about it. So did Ailes Lichtenberg, and both of those are included at the end of this presentation. And in my blog, well, most of them are blog posts, about how to do it step by step. And the agents I wrote, or the scripts that I created, a lot of those ended up in OpenNTF. For those that don't know, OpenNTF has a script library, and I asked them, I think it's 2 years ago now, to grant admins the place to put scripts as well. And so there actually are a bunch of scripts and codes that I've added for admins to use. Obviously, you can use other things, but these are specific in ID registrations, how to fix things in the address book and stuff like that. So some great stuff out on the OpenNTF side. You can search by my name or search by admin scripts and you'll find them in the snippets area. So that's kind of how you get around the issue of the IDs, which is usually the big question everyone has when I talk about this, how are we going to register people to TOTP? So that's kind of that. Hopefully there won't be too many questions on it because it is pretty elaborate to explain, but I'll do my best to answer questions at the end on it. Mobile clients. This is mostly taken straight from the HCL docs. I highlighted 3 aspects which may affect most people, which is the HCL companion or to-do apps for iOS do not support TOTP. If you're using those, please be aware. Also, native Apple iOS Mail does not work with TOTP. Somebody, drawing a blank entirely on your name, I apologize. Someone sent me a note after they found out I was doing this session and asked me about this, and I said, I'm pretty sure they stayed out front that you can't do what you're trying to do. And I looked it up and indeed it was there. So that's why I've highlighted that. And Traveler for Outlook clients do not support it as well. There's some other miscellaneous things out there. And for sure, you should always read whatever the latest docs are when you're going to do this. But this is kind of the main things that pop up with people up front that they ask about. So no SAML or basic authentication support. You may or may not even know what SAML is, and that doesn't matter. But if you do know, then you realize, how are you going to make this work for you? And you're going to have to kind of think about that. And we're going to talk about that in a second. The basic side, basic authentication, hopefully most people are beyond that at this point. But some of you in the older environments who haven't quite been updating or had admins who have been working with you to migrate forward on more secure levels, you may still be in the basic authentication mode. Suffice it to say, you need to get to single server or multi-server. There's nothing really wrong with that, but just as an aside, just so you know, if you run into problems, this could be one of the reasons. SAML and TOTP. I have a customer who wanted to use SAML for users with Windows computers and TOTP for other devices. And they were talking about internal people, like not external. So this was an interesting discussion. So I said to them, I said, well, do you need the TOTP internally? And they felt they did. And I said, okay. It turns out it wasn't that they needed it internally, but they were not using a VPN. They were relying on people coming into, whatever the web domain server. And I said, well, anybody on the outside coming in is going to need the TOTP on that URL, which should not affect the user logging in as themselves. But we ended up with a more deeper discussion. And what we decided to do was we had 2 different URLs, one for the SAML people, one for the quote unquote non-SAML people, whatever that meant. But they had an understanding of what they wanted. It's easy to do this when you're talking about a specific person or to a specific server application. It's not easy to do this when you have a large entity or a large customer base, because you have to figure out a way to track them. There has to be a better way to do it. We don't have a group access by URL by default in the system, which would be nice to have. So you need to plan this stuff out and think about it. Sometimes people have created separate servers and said, everybody who needs SAML is going to server A, people without it are going to server B, and that's how they got around it. And it made it easy because they said, well, you get registered here, you get registered there, and that's how they dealt with it. There are ways to always do things. Domino has lots of ins and outs. I'm not telling you there's one way or another. I'm just trying to give you all the choices of ways to think about before you roll out TOTP. So the cert ID, as I said earlier, has to be on the server in the Domino data directory to set up TOTP. You can remove it once TOTP is set up. It doesn't have to stay there. Probably a good idea to keep it there, but other people argue you shouldn't keep it there. I'm not going to get into the middle of it, but whatever. But let's presume you have no idea where your cert ID is, or you lost the password to it, or as I just did the other day, it expired at a customer who the 20 or 25 year thing had expired for them. They had no idea. And actually, what do? You know, right? How do you fix it? So in the end, I actually did change the calendar, went back until whatever date it was working, restarted everything, and then turned it back on, and we were okay to go forward. But that doesn't always work for everybody. Sometimes you're going to create a new cert, you're going to have to migrate everyone to it or cross-certify everyone to it. That's just what's going to happen. I don't think it happens as often these days as it used to in companies who have had long established practices and people and admins, but we've been seeing a noticeable absence of admins to customers who have reached out to us for help. And while I'm happy to help them, it does become a problem because if they don't know the ID, where the IDs are or the passwords, we kind of are, you know, we're going to be out of luck at a certain point with them, and we're going to have to think real fast how we're going to fix it all. So it does happen that way. As a last resort, or maybe not a last resort, but as an option, there is a way, if CA had been set up, for you to reverse out the ID and passwords. We've done this for a very large bank. Maybe there's a doc on this, I'm not sure. We had something internal and I can't really share that, but there is a way to do that. HCL, you can request it that way. Windows Server updates. If you're really good and follow best practices, I'm sure you've got a dev and qual environment and a prod environment, but a lot of you don't. And you just love to just, you know, play Russian roulette with your environment. If you're replacing your old Windows Server upgrading R12s and you want the TOTP process to be easy and set and worked out, it's nice on a clean environment. Build a new box, put it all together, and then pull data over afterwards, right? If you're going to try and do this together and have a mix and match of an R9 and 12 environment, be very careful, okay? Because the name and address book, it has multiple template changes. I used R9, but it could be R10 or 11, doesn't matter. Because the changes affect not just the address book, the servers, the clients, the users, everybody. And also you need the fields and views for TOTP. So if the replication went and blocked off the 12 stuff by replacing it with the 10 or 11, you won't have the TOTP. None of your configuration will work. You're going to be pulling your hair out trying to figure out what's wrong. So think about this as you're trying to build that environment and what are you going to do and how you're going to do it. And then once you build that new server, how do you manage the ID vault on 2 servers and versions? Not everyone realizes the ID vault does not replicate. I mean, it does replicate, but not like a normal database. You actually have to tell it to include another server to replicate with it and work with it. So if you weren't aware of that, we're going to talk about that. I know we're kind of going down like a weird path of this ID vault, but the ID vault is everything for TOTP. So I'm trying to make sure you get all the upfront knowledge that kind of was missing in the docs because there wasn't a lot of prerequisite discussion. You only find this out after the fact. So when you created your ID vault, guess what? It expires. I had no idea, actually. I mean, maybe I did in the back of my head, but it hadn't dawned on me that it expired. 10 years is not a long time. I mean, I have IDs that go back to 1993. I have mail that goes back to 1993. So 10 years, not a long time, but you have to renew it. So here's 2 tech notes about how to do that, okay? Now, it may be time for you to renew. But anyway, moving forward, right? You also created at the same time, you got an ID, an ID vault ID, and that ID vault ID had a password. Probably you've got no idea what that password is. Sometimes people made it the same as their cert password, sometimes they didn't, right? You may need to recreate the ID vault and fix that if you don't know it. If you do know it, great, because you're going to need it. But if not, what's going to happen? How are you going to deal with this stuff? You're going to need this because the R12 server, if you are migrating from an older server to a new one, right, and you're doing a server to server, not an in place, you're going to need to share that ID vault from the old domain to the new one. And you're going to need the ID vault ID and password, because without it, you can't share the ID vault. right? So why would I do that, right? And basically because you're probably doing the migration from an older box to a new box. And the ID vault is everything. So if you are going to recreate it, you need that ID. That ID actually does not go on the server. It actually gets registered and put in the client side. So if you know who created the ID vault and what machine they used, or what, if they, I don't know if they still have the same machine 10 years later, but if it was a server or a jump box or something, you might get lucky and that ID file sitting there, although you may not know the password. If you don't know the password, you're kind of out of luck. Because although there's a tech note how to change the password, it presumes you know the password to start. And if you're looking for a lost ID, vault ID, you're going to have a problem as well. But the first tech note is about how to replicate the ID vault. It's not very difficult. It's relatively simple. But most people haven't had to play with their ID vault. They set it up and let it go and forgot about it. But it's now in play, and you're going to have to remember what to do with it and how to do it and where to go with it. And that's, unfortunately, that's part of the way business goes, right? You have to, if you're already going to look at your ID vault and fix it or update it, you should probably verify who's doing password resets and the vault administrators. Because if it was created 10 years ago or so, your admins might not be there, right people might be there. You want to have control, because you're going to need that control in order to manage the ID and this TOTP process with the ID vault. So it's a good time to clean house. For people who want to know about TOTP and Docker, yes, you can do it. There's some information about it. Basically, as long as there's a way in and out of the Docker server, it can basically be there. The documents are there for it. HCL recommends running HTTP with a default internet site, TLS enabled, and the SNI enabled to connect to the website or host name. If you're a big Docker person, you probably already know about some of this, but if you're looking at putting Domino into Docker or putting it into use, it's good to know that this is available for you to use as well. I am not a Docker guru, so if anybody asks any questions about it, I'm not going to be able to tell you very much. Just letting you know. There's also cross-configuration, configuring cross-domain. So if you're a part of an M&A, you're part of a, let's say, multinational company who has different domains out there, there are ways for you to share the TOTP across all those domains, right? You're going to need, especially if the domains are not in sync, number-wise, you're going to need an R12 server on both sides. And it doesn't have to be one like a primary or whatever, but there has to be a R12 server set up with the correct templates and the correct ID vault and correct DOM CFG. There are steps to run on both sides, the primary and the secondary domain. The primary domain basically sets up a DA. There's an INI that has to be added first, the cross-domain authentication. Then you set up a DA, then you set up TOTP in domain 1. And then you replicate that across domain 1. So it's kind of like you're just setting up TOTP for your domain with the extra DA and the notes INI, right? So nothing too crazy here. And I'm not going to walk through the steps because there's not a lot of reason to do that, but they are here and it's pretty easy. It basically is just saying create the DA, which most of you probably have. On the second box, on the secondary domain, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add the notes INI. We're going to make sure that there's cross certifications for both domains and for the other. Again, we're going to need a DA, and we're going to set up the DA accordingly, right? And you're going to specify the replica of domain 1's DOM directory and DOM2 so that the two can stay in sync. And this is where the fun part starts. So now, instead of just creating TOTP, we're actually running a specific code, which is similar to what you would do for TOTP, and you're running the MFA management create trust cert, but you're going to need to run two. The first one being the original primary one you would have used, and the second one for the second domain. And that way, both of them are trusted now for the environment. And then obviously those get replicated across the domain and back and forth. And if you do all that stuff, then you could basically have users rely on the TOTP that you've created for everybody. So a question that comes up is, if TOTP requires the ID vault to have a V12 design and running on a V12 server, will this cause problems for other servers with the ID vault not yet upgraded to V12? So I say yes and no. HCL says it's fine. I say yes and no because if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to screw up your environment, no question. If you do know what you're doing, yes, you can get through it, but it does take a little bit of patience and a little bit of careful planning and action, right? I've had customers who have done this and it failed miserably. I've had customer who worked fine. So what's the difference? And the difference is that in one case, the replication hadn't been fixed, and therefore we've wiped out all our changes in the new environment from the old one. But the TOTP needs the R12 environment. The address book has to be updated. The ID vault has to be updated to R12. DOM CFG has to be updated for R12, as we're going to find out, because that's where the configuration starts from the MFA. And all that stuff all put together is what will allow it to work. And if you have multiple servers not on R12 and some on R9 and they're doing the ID vault stuff, you have to be very careful of what's happening. I'd like to say there's an easy way through it. I don't really feel there is. I think you're kind of better off building your new environment and then pulling the old data into the new one and making it work. That's kind of the way we've taken with customers in order to limit the amount of issues we would have. And that's been a lot safer route. So that's my recommendation. But as always, your mileage may vary. So that's a lot of and prerequisites, isn't it? And we haven't even got to how do you install it and what do you do? So let's do that. Time to get it configured and installed. So let's go to a server console, right? From the admin client is easiest. And this is after we put the cert ID on the server, don't forget. You're going to put in this code, this text, MFA management, create trust cert, /o equals domain, space cert ID name, space cert ID password. And you're going to hit enter, let that build itself. It'll replicate across the directory. And then you want to check the certificate view to make sure that the MFA took. And we'll get into troubleshooting that in a little bit. So you go back to the console and you say show ID vault. And what you're going to do is look for the following, kind of like I've got on the bottom here. The main part is that the admin server is correct, that the domain trusts this vault, right? In my case, it's VBI trusts this vault, and domain trust domain for MFA. If you don't see that domain trust the domain for MFA, then your command up above probably did not run properly for whatever reason, and you need to go look into why. And we'll get to that. But we're here right now to talk about installation. So we're not talking about troubleshooting the installation yet. We're going to get to that. Let's continue. So now that we've created the MFA, in theory, what do we do next? Next step, go to the admin client, open the configuration tab, messaging section, default config, or if you have a specific server you want it on, open the security tab, configure the MFA options, which are going to be on the next screen, and then you're going to save the page and close it. So let's see that screen. Here is what you're going to see when you go to that security tab, right? This is all fresh in 12. Time-based TOTP for web authentication, you want to enable it, right? Allow emergency scratch codes. If you say no, I'm just letting you know, it will not work. So say yes, okay? Email scratch codes to a user. This one you could say no if you want, because really, what user is walking around with their scratch codes? I ask you. I have never had anybody even know they even had them, let alone know what to do with them. It's kind of silly, but I understand why it's there for compliance purposes. Maximum number of secrets. I put in 3. I think the maximum is 3 actually. Why? Because you've got a PC, a phone, and a tablet, iPad. If you only set this to 1, think about what you're doing to the person, right? When that laptop gets replaced or they get a new phone, you've locked them out of everything. If you put it on multiple devices, then they're able to get in from a secondary device and then eventually reinstall it and get back and working. But if you set it to 1, you're just basically asking for tons of help desk calls. So I'm just letting you know. Algorithm. HMAC SHA T56 is the most common one. Microsoft used SHA1, and there actually is SHA 512 now, which may have been a 1202 update because I don't remember seeing it in 1201. But it's been a while since I had looked at the earlier domains. So you pick the one that will work with whatever authenticator you want. Google, PingID, Authy, Duo, Microsoft, whatever. Doesn't matter. Most of them will work with the 256. Select a internet password verifier. You can pick by directory in the vault or check vault and directory. That's up to you based on how your environment works and what you think is going to be the best for your teams, your users. There is enforced internet password lockout, and I would highly recommend you say yes, because if you don't, you may end up having all kinds of people trying to slam and break through, plus your users will do it anyway. But this will allow you to get the checkbox that says enforce lockout based on IP address. This helps when people are trying to log in, because then you basically can block out too. Log the settings, up to you how much you want to log. Default maximum tries allowed. I think 3 is not enough. 5 is a good number, but again, that's up to you. Default lockout expiration, 10 minutes. You can also do it in hours or days, I think. I have it set for 10 minutes just to kind of reset and try again. Default maximum tries interval is how long before a correct connection will reset all the invalid ones. So if I tried 4 times and the 5th time got it to work, per day. So that's what that means. And server ID protection should be use the OS credentials to make your life easy. So that's the configuration doc that you have to create and save. Now, we're going to move to the website docs. And I'm using website docs because most of the time in bigger entities, you're going to have multiple websites. And since we know we're probably going to have multiple websites, you're going to need website docs. So from the directory, go to config web internet sites. You're going to go to the engine Domino web engine tab, as you see on the screen, change the session authentication to single server. Then we're going to the configuration tab, and we're going to add checkboxes next to delete and put. And we're going to add TOTP from the dropdown for enabled services for this URL, right, for this website. You're then going to go to the security tab, select TOTP option in both the name and password fields, which is under regular and TLS. So that TOTP is now turned on for that domain, for that URL. Then you're going to save your changes, right? So far, so good. Nothing too horrendously hard. There's a middle step where you go into your security policy. There's going to be an ID vault tab. And there's a section at the bottom where you want to enable or just say yes to allow TOTP authentication with the ID vault, because that's what you want. You want the IDs in the vault to be what you're going to work with. And allow password authentication with the ID vault, yes. And that's how you ensure that the ID vault is the way to go for the future. The next step is to secure the mail. And in the vault configuration document of your ID vault, specify the servers that use the ID vault and are enabled for TOTP. So this may or may not be the same server name. So you're going to specify which server. So remember my slide where I said, everything is URL based, which is true, but it's server based from the sense of you have to be on an R12 server, otherwise it's not going to work, right? So this is where you would put that into the vault name and add this section just so that it knows who to trust and for which box for secure mail. The next step is you have to add the MFA login form, which comes out of the DOM CFG. The DOM CFG, which is the Domino Web Server Config Database. This slide is here for the people who have never set one up. If you've never set one up, you probably don't even need the TOTP because you're probably using everything internal to your office, right? But for the sake of simplicity, you create, create a new file, use that template, create the NSF. It has to be called DOM-CFG, and click OK. And then what you're going to do is go into this new database or your existing one, and you're going to create a mapping, add mapping, and you're going to select, is this going to be good for everything or just for a specific website? And you're going to tell it, I want to use this database, the DOM-CFG, and the MFA is called $login user form MFA. And that right there is what turns on that TOTP prompt at the login on your URL. But before we get there, you have to change the ACL for the DOM-CFG. Make sure reader access is allowing read public documents, write, and replicate. And after all that is saved and done, then you restart your ID Vault server, because that's the one that's going to handle all the TOTP stuff. And if you've done all that, then TOTP now is up and running. Congratulations. Cool, right? Not so bad. Now here comes the fun part. How to troubleshoot TOTP configuration doesn't work. You may or may not have installed it properly. That's not the issue here, right? You may feel that it should just work, and in theory it should, but there are reasons why things may have not quite gone the way you thought they did. Also, unbeknownst to us sometimes, templates do get changed. They do get updated, unfortunately, sometimes at the exact wrong time when we don't want them to. Maybe it's just because we forgot, we weren't paying attention, or who knows what. So there's a long bit of troubleshooting that we're going to get through right now. So first, in 12.01, there was a new error message, which thank God, because in 12.0 we didn't have this, where if you go to log in and the ID was not in the ID vault, it would just keep prompting you to try and log in. Now it actually will tell you if that ID is even in the ID vault. True, this doesn't tell you all the other reasons why you can't log in, but if your ID is not in the ID vault, the admin at least says, oh, I have to put an ID in the ID vault, I can take care of that, right? Not a horrible thing to take care of, but it's something that definitely makes life easier for us on the admin side. Let's say you're one of those people who needs some other help. TOTP seems to work, but something's fishy. So let's say you have users that need more than 30 seconds to put the MFA into the device or the phone or the laptop. So TOTP step size, the first INI setting, works in 30-second intervals. You basically give it a number and it'll go, you go give it how many seconds it should be. 30 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever you want. The second one down, time skew steps. This one, actually, I've seen an effect on a very large VM installation. Someone had a big VM box, which I don't know, 20 machines on it or something, and the time was off. Now, TOTP, of course, is based on time. So if the timing is off between the client and the server or the server and the other servers, there's going to be a problem. So what we did was we added this skew and we told it the factor of 2 or 3, I think, because we wanted to give it a minute and a half leeway. It wasn't that far off, but we knew it was more than 30 seconds. It may have been as much as over a minute for whatever reasons. Maybe it's network lag time, hard to tell. So that option is here for you. The cross-domain authentication we talked about earlier. And then there's a couple debugs at the bottom here that are very detailed if you need to find out what's happening. Right? The transaction one, especially the trust certs, they tell you if anything is not the way it should be, which is great. But wait, there's more. We got a whole bunch of nodes INI settings. Obviously, a bunch of these are ID vault related, but some of them are just as important because TOTP and the ID vault must work together. So let's say a person logs in and can't talk to it, you need to know why. So there's web reasons, there's .login reasons, or password reasons, ID vault reasons, ID reasons, right? All kinds of things get in the way here. And so these are all the INI settings that I pulled from various places related to the ID vault and TOTP troubleshooting, with some explanation for some of them not as much. They're there, and you probably will need them. Most likely, you're probably likely going to call HCL for help, and they'll probably tell you to turn on some of these anyway. But that's kind of what happens. The biggest one I've used is the IDV underscore trust cert, because that's what gives you a good explanation of what's happening transactionally. You might find you're unable to upload ID files. So normally, I shouldn't say normally, but since the R12 template came out, the admin can right click on a person and select upload ID file to ID Vault, or they can go to actions and upload ID file to ID Vault. But what happens when you go to do that and it's not there? So as it turned out, one of my customers had made some knob changes and had blocked specific views from being updated by templates. Everything else would update, but not specific views. Guess which view we needed for TOTP? Exactly. So you may have a prohibit design refresher or replace to fix on those views. So if you don't see these two options for the user, you know you've got a template issue and you got to go find out why and fix it. ID Vault creation, if you see this error in the server console, right, invalid or non-existent document, no certifier is found, then you probably got some problems and you're better off just deleting whatever is in the list of the multi-factor authentication and Vault Trust certs and recreating the ID Vault and then the TOTP again. You'll find a lot of times that the issues you have are probably related to either the ID Vault setup or the TOTP setup. In either case, that's most of the answer of recreating those. Different ID Vault message is missing or invalid password reset trust certificate. This is ID Vault corruption we found, and we had to delete the Vault Trust and MFA certs, and then we had to recreate the ID Vault and run the MFA management again as well. We still don't know what caused that one, but that was basically what HCL came back to us and told us was the issue, and we said, fine, we can recreate it, not a problem. Always interesting to see where those go at the end of the day. If the MFA is not allowing a user setup, and this is kind of like you go to the login page and you don't see the MFA option that should be there, then most likely your DOM CFG has probably lost something, right, in a template. Or maybe you're trying to do something that didn't get where it needed to go. You may have to redo the MFA create certificate. Also, in one case, and this is why kind of odd, we found that you had to say no to allow TOTP authentication with the ID Vault field. And that was a specific environment issue that we had. So these things just happen, unfortunately. I'd like to say there's a specific rhyme or reason, but we couldn't always come up with a definitive answer. So some issues with the environment. If the server reports an error like this, where it says there is no sign-in form mapping for a virtual server, or you get this object variable not set when you click on TOTP configuration check. And this TOTP configuration check is in the person doc on top after you open the person. It's also in the server doc. It's also in the website doc. But if you get this object variable not set, you need the public template to be at 1202. There was an issue in the 1201 series, I believe, in very specific environments that caused this problem, which of course was one of my customers. So we had to not only update the template, the NAB template, but we also had to update the DOM CFG template to resolve that. You might also get a token field problem is missing. This error comes up for when you go to log in for three reasons. One is the second reference to the TOTP server showed up. Maybe you hit enter twice by accident. The templates might not have been updated properly, or maybe they were, but still didn't get to 12.0x, whatever you're up to. And the DOM CFG might be needed to be recreated because maybe you accidentally replicated over it with some other code that shouldn't have been there. I'm not saying who did that one, but probably it's the person who's about to click something. There's also sometimes where you're going to put in your code and the ID Vault is just not going to show. Certificate list is not going to show the entry. You're going to try and figure out what's wrong with it. And this is also, again, a directory template issue. Once you update the template, it should appear. It's not that it's not there. You actually did it right. but because the template wasn't updated, it doesn't have a way to understand it and show it properly in the view. So again, you have to be very careful that your templates are up to date and you're not overwriting them with anything along the way. I know this sounds like so much fun, right? This is what everybody wants to do with their day, troubleshoot TOTP. Really, it does get really easy because once you're done, like it is just done and good, right? So there's also, for those on 1201 FixPack 1, if you had DA running, the directory assistance, it would ignore that TOTP if you had DA running. There was a hotfix. It should be in 1202, but if you're on 1201 FixPack 1, you need that hotfix. So definitely go ask for it, call HCL, and they will give it to you. So yet another thing that just kind of randomly happens sometimes, and you're wondering, why is this not working? Only to find out, indeed, there actually was code issues. This is the last of the troubleshooting items that I've got. And this one is from this past week, actually. There was a tech note about this, verse iOS 12.0.14, not working with 12.01. The bottom line is you should get to 12.0.15, but the information about what's going on and why is also really important, especially that second paragraph under the workaround. If your Traveler server has been updated already to the latest, and your Domino server has not, when you update your Domino server, you need to go back and reinstall your Traveler server and update it, because it's going to overwrite templates on code changes. So, and that's kind of where part of that problem began. So just another thing for you to think about, especially if you're iOS happy people and you're not on 12.02. Ideally, I try and get all my clients to the latest version who are using TOTP, because I know there have been enhancements that we want to pass along to everyone. So now that we've got it installed, now that we've been troubleshooting it and dealing with it, how do we get the users connected, right? Users, they don't read anything we send them, but if they did, this is what we would tell them. They need to install on their device one of the common authenticator apps, okay? Put on their phone, on their laptop, whatever it is, any one of them. They need to log in from a computer to the Domino login page from the URL you tell them that has TOTP. Cannot do this the first time from a phone or a tablet. The system will bring them to the MFA setup properly. They enter their name, their code, their scan the barcode on the screen usually is the easiest way to do it. And then they enter the code from the authenticator. Then they'll get scratch codes on screen. It'll mail them scratch codes, select done. Then they log in as usual, but now they'll have to include the authenticator mode, code. And that, as I say, is all the user has to do. And yet, you're going to find that Monday morning, you're going to have 1,000 calls from people going, the MFA doesn't work. I don't know how to use it. Yeah, well, I'm just letting you know there isn't much to it. You can try and screenshot this somehow for them. I'm not a real good person getting screenshots from my phone and stuff. This part could be done from a desktop, obviously, but then people get on their phones and they're like, it's not working. Domino needs a little bit of time, to be fair. It doesn't process it all immediately. And you kind of need to think about how are you going to get this to work. So remind people when they do it, just give it just a couple minutes, don't know what, just log in, then you can go do it. You'll be fine and good. Off you go. Right? If by chance you need to update or change their TOTP for a user, right? The Android devices will let you go from non-TOTP to TOTP without reinstalling. iOS will not. If you're disabling TOTP for people, you have to uninstall the client and then get rid of it. Sorry about that. My other thing does not want to link. But it was annoying because I did turn off the phone. So nothing to tell them. All right. Right, so disabling TOTP will require you to reinstall everybody. So that's managing the TOTP side. Sorry, that was user instructions. So now managing the TOTP. So we did troubleshooting. Now we're going to talk about management, and then we're going to get to resetting the users. just kind of a similar kind of world. So how do you manage TOTP? For the most part, you don't have to do a lot because the user is doing the hard work once you set up TOTP and once you put people in the ID vault and once they have passwords, right? So what do you got to do? So the admin tools you're going to need are the Internet Password Lockout Database, because you've told it to lock people out if they get into trouble, if they can't log in, if they can't figure out what they're doing, right? The ID Vault database, goes without saying, is very important here. You're going to need their person document to run the TOTP configuration check, which came out, I think in 1201 was the person doc. The server document, TOTP configuration check, which came out in 12, and the website internet site document, TOTP configuration check, which came out in 12 as well. So these are the main things that you're going to need. And what are you going to need? You're going to have to use these. There's the Internet Password Lockout Database, right? Which is where people get listed by IP or by name. Are they locked out? How many times they got locked out? And if they're a user, then you're going to select them, click on Mark for Delete Unlock, and then delete marked items to free them up to try again once you fix them, right? And you've got views of login failures and locked out users. Login failures just tell you how many times they tried before they got blocked. So usually you'll see people screw up the first 1 or 2 times, and then they'll be okay to continue on it as they move forward. The ID Vault database, for those who don't know, you go in, all the people are listed, right? This is just a demo box, so it's pretty simple, 2 users, right? And you see for me, I've got TOTP, I've got 1 device, 10 scratch codes, right? Nice and simple. But let's say I need to fix something with mine that's not working, or my TOTP is messed up, or I got a new device, or whatever it is. So when you open up the user and you go to actions from the top menu, you've got reset TOTP items. You click on it and all my info goes away, and then I'm free to recreate the MFA for myself. So nice and simple on that level. Here's some fun. Person document. Open up my person document and you'll see on top TOTP configuration check. So I click on it, I get my first box. And what does it do? It says checking user. According to policy, user should be in the vault. Checking ID vault, right? But then instead of saying user has an ID there, it says no problems found with user. I'd like it to say ID found, but whatever. And then it says something really interesting. Please run TOTP troubleshooter on the server or site document that's failing. Keep that in mind, because there is no such thing as a TOTP troubleshooter. You can't find it in the docs. You will not find it on the server. If I click on a different user, as the second box shows, checking user, according to policy, user should be in the vault, checking ID. The ID was not found in the vault. Okay, so the problem is the person doesn't have an ID in the vault. Great, right? That's cool. That's exactly what we want. We want to know who's there. Now you could say, why don't I go to the ID vault to start? And the answer is because I don't see the need when I first want to know, is it a user issue or is it an ID vault issue? And this kind of gives me an insight to both at the same time. The last on the bottom actually is an internet user, not a notes registered mail person. And checking user, KH Brooks, this person is not a Domino user. So immediately you know there's no cert and there's no ID even created. So obviously they can't just log in and you need to create them. So that's a person document. And keep in mind that TOTP troubleshooter line is pretty amusing. TOTP server doc. Remember, it said to go to the server doc. So we go to server doc, open it up, and what do we see? TOTP configuration check, just like it said in the person side. Interesting, right? No TOTP troubleshooter. Anyway, so you click on that, and what does it tell you? It says checking server. Server is set to use websites, checking websites. There's no sign-in form mapping. Okay, now in this case, for that specific URL, that's true. This is something which I need to talk to HCL about. Why does it not look at all the different references I have for this domain? It must be looking at the default one rather than all the other ones. Because if it did, it would find my other one where it's actually properly set up. The second box below, for fun, I clicked on my Quicker server. Now, I'm going to be honest, my Quicker server has not been alive for quite some time, but it is in my domain. And what you get is the server is not high enough to support TOTP version 12 or higher. So if you're new to an environment and you want to find out what's happening, this will tell you which of those boxes are good to go and which ones aren't. So it's a nice little bit of support there. If you're at the web internet site document, the same thing. You open up the domain, click on TOTP configuration check. First box says checking TOTP appears to be configured correctly. Yes. If particular users are having trouble signing in, try running TOTP troubleshooter on the person document. Again, there is no such thing as a TOTP troubleshooter on the person document, but there is TOTP configuration check. So just to be clear on the nomenclature. The other button is a different domain, and you can see there's no sign-in form mapping for virtual server, which is true because only this one domain had TOTP set up. So the server can tell you what's happening at different levels, which is really important, what we want.
Keith, Graham yeah. Here. Just time check. We've got 10 minutes left in our presentation.
Yep, I'm aware.
We don't have any questions, so people, if you do have questions, please do chime in there. But Keith, feel free to take the whole time, and we can do questions manually afterwards.
Okay, well, I'm almost at that point, so that's fine. So in 12.01, there were two things to know. There was an update for the ID vault so that you can force information into it and update with QVault, load QVault-X vault name U password, and that will update the certs and the update on the ID files in the ID vault. The other one that came through was load the QVault username for people who you may want to deactivate at times. And the only thing I can think of is like when you think about companies who hire seasonal workers, maybe this is where this comes in, because I think in general, most people just want to remove people and put them in denial list when they're not active. But there might be reasons why you want to do this, and so respectfully, it is available now. So moving along, resetting users' TOTP details, right? How do you do it? As I've already pointed one of them. But generally, you either go to the ID Vault database and do reset TOTP, or from the admin client, go to the person and then tool side ID Vault reset TOTP configuration, which looks like this. Here's the screen, and on top you got actions reset TOTP and ID Vault reset TOTP configurations. So pretty basic stuff. That's kind of what you do, kind of like in travel, where you want to like reset someone's travel connection. So the what I call the fun part, customizing your forms, your login page, your graphics, your text. So the simple thing is we're basically here to change a resource image. You're going to open the DOM CFG 5 NTF, go to resource and images. You're going to export the existing PNG file to your PC, open it up in a graphic editor, add your logo to it or any text you want on the left side, save it, put it back in, change the name to like setup 2. Then you're going to upload it back by importing image. You're going to rename the original that's in the database to 3, let's say. You're also going to change the alias because it needs a name and the alias to match. So you're going to say original to 3 and an alias to 3. Then rename the one you uploaded to MFA setup 1 and change the alias to MFA setup 1, just like on the screenshot. Then you're going to save your changes, refresh design, refresh your login page. If you want to change how the HTML part looks, right, because that was just the logo part. If you want to change the HTML part, you go into the form, to the database, go into designer, go to $login user form MFA, edit the HTML, and again, refresh the browser, save it, test it. And if all goes well, this is what you'll see. You'll have gotten rid of the HCL Domino part, you'll have added your logos, and now anybody who comes to your site knows it's you and where they belong properly and accordingly. So with that, to the last bit that we've got is all the links. There's links from HCL, there's links to my blog post, L's blog post, to previous decks that I did on this, to a HAR file, which is what HCL required when we were talking about website. And pretty much almost everything you would need is in this page link-wise that I can think of, if it's not in one of those slide decks that I've done. And with that, I'd like to wish everybody a happy St. Patrick's Day. from all of us at OpenNTF. And I hope that this has been helpful and useful to everybody. And thank you for all of your time.
Excellent. Thank you, Keith. We've got lots of positive feedback here, and we actually do have a question that's come in. The cert ID must be on the server for initial configuration. Does it need to remain on the server or only for creating the trust cert and can be removed after?
It only has to be there while you're configuring the TOTP configuration. After you're done and after the server restarts, then you can remove the cert ID if you don't want it to stay there.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And I had one that was scratching the back of my brain. You were talking very early in the presentation about Nomad, and I wanted to clarify that that meant Nomad Web.
Yes, that was Nomad Web.
So you were talking
the old Nomad.
specifically about TOTP not working with Nomad, and I
Right.
know whether it needed the clarification or not.
Yeah, it's suffice it to say with Nomad right now, there is no Domino TOTP that will work with it. So if you're trying to get people to use Nomad and connect on their tablets or whatever, you're going to have to put either HCL safe links up front for the MFA or some other MFA app, as far as I've been told.
Okay. If anybody has any other questions, jot them in. I'm just going to steal presenter here and flip over to the OpenNTF page that you were talking about and show the scripts that you have posted.
Yeah. You need me to get out or? Oh, no,
No.
you can do it.
Yeah, I've got too many windows open here. Just bear with me for a moment. Goodness sakes. Okay, show my screen. And we're showing the question screen, and I am going to bring up my browser. Come on. There we go. So this is openntf.org/xsnippets.nsf. You can get to it if we go back to the beginning here. Just go right there. So there's openntf.org. If you click on snippets, and I've filtered already, but if you go to the language link and filter and scroll down, you can choose admin scripts. And then Keith's admin scripts are available right there.
Oh, nice.
Okay, we got another question that's come in. Can you enable TOTP for web users who are not Notes users?
Yeah. Okay, so I spent a bit of time on the early part of this, and this is kind of elaborate, but TOTP requires the ID vault. TOTP requires an ID in the ID vault. So if you've got someone who has not been registered as a proper user, but has been registered as an internet user, then they don't have a cert and they don't have an ID. So you basically need to register them properly as a proper user. And as I pointed out, when it's a one person off thing, or a few people, yeah, you just do it, because it's just easier. But if you're talking about suddenly you're going to have to re-register 1,000 people or 500 people or whatever it is, then you're going to need to look at my blog posts where I explain how to do the whole process, because you need the CSV file, you need to work with the registry page, you need to change options, you need to run a couple agents, you need to delete mail files. You need to be careful with some of the changes. The alternative is, if you're lucky enough, you just create another domain and another server, you just put everybody on that. But that's not always the way people want to go. So you're going to basically have a whole process to do. And I outlined it pretty well in some blog posts I wrote over the last 2 years. Also, Ailes Lichtenberg did a similar kind of post or two, if you want to look at his, if that's of interest too. I feel
Excellent.
your pain. I've told HCL that they need to think about this, and so far they have chosen not to. So,
right. Okay, we got one more question, and I think that's all the time that we've got today. Reed's asking, was it mentioned that there's a way to programmatically upload ID files into the vault?
So yes and no. I was told, hire a developer and they will, help you do that. So the answer is yes, programmatically you could do it. However, as an admin who is not a developer, I can say there are ways to do it in a semi-automated way, which is what I've done and outlined in my posts. The biggest issue is that you basically have to register people as mail users, then turn off them being mail users, and you've got to delete their mail files. So, yes, you could probably do this. I'm not a developer, so I'm not going to tell you how, because that's not me. But again, I did write some very elaborate blog posts explaining this because I had to do it for a few thousand people. And actually, I'm going to have to do it again for a few thousand people. So it's a fun job.
Okay. Thank you, Keith. Really appreciate it, and the level of detail was excellent.
Thanks,
On
Graham.
behalf of my co-hosts, Jesse Gallagher and Roberto Bocadaro, everybody at OpenNTF, thank you very much for everybody for joining, and we'll leave you with what I've got on the screen right now, which is the OpenNTF page that describes how to join our Discord server, and you can come over there and ask more questions and participate. We look forward to seeing you there. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks. All right. Well, thank you, Graham. Thanks, Roberto. If
Thanks,
you're still
Keith.
there, Roberto.
Mhm.
Who